Welcome. Let me share my thoughts on the Rahu-Ketu signification in Krishnamurti Paddhati. This is based on my practical observations while going through several horoscopes. But let us first look at what Shri Krishnamurti had to say about the Rahu and Ketu signification. In his book, The Third Reader and Horary Astrology and many other books, he has mentioned 4 different rules, and those are Shri KSK mentions as regards Rahu and Ketu. The first rule is they indicate the results of the planet with which they are conjoined. Second is if no planet is in conjunction with them, they bestow the results of the planets aspecting them. Then the third is if Rahu or Ketu is neither conjoined with nor aspected by any planet, it offers the results of the Lord of the constellation in which it is deposited. And finally, the fourth is the results of the sign. But as you go through various examples in his books, you will not see these 4 rules are strictly followed, and even sometimes new rules are mentioned on the fly. This has obviously resulted in a great deal of confusion, and many times I have seen that Rahu-Ketu signification is evaluated on an ad hoc basis. There are no fixed rules and there are no clarity. But let's first see how these rules 1, 2, 3, 4 are used by taking a horoscope. Many softwares would just identify the conjunction, aspect and the Rashi, and they will make a note about it and just leave it for the Jyotishi to make sense out of it. Here is one layout where it is mentioned that Rahu by conjunction represents none, Rahu by aspect represents Jupiter, Rahu by sign represents Saturn. I'm just reading for Rahu, but this is also applicable for Ketu as well. So typically what they would do is that they would just mention the position of the Rahu in 7th in the cusp chart, and then they would identify the other signification of Rahu by mentioning as a footnote or as a note, and then they will leave it for the astrologer to make a sense of it. But the way to interpret conjunction and aspect itself lacks a clarity in KP. You will find many articles and suggestions where the degree of the planets and the Western aspects are made use of. And at the same time, many other articles with no regard to the way conjunction and aspect is used in Western. So there is more confusion regarding how to use the conjunction and the aspect. Should one follow the Western method and take the degree into account, or one should just ignore it? Now there is another confusion when you have these kind of footnotes appearing. And we already saw these 4 rules that were mentioned in slide 1. But now in this chart, if you look at this chart, you will see that Jupiter is a very strong significator of the houses 2, 6 and 10. You can see that Jupiter is a strongly grouping together the houses 2, 6 and 10, which is deemed to be good for the business. But in many of the KP books and articles, you will find this kind of a note when you are interpreting Jupiter in this light. The nodes are ever powerful. Rahu is being aspected by Jupiter. Thus, whatever Jupiter has to do, Rahu will do it strongly. Hence, reject Jupiter and take Rahu. Now, this kind of note about the Rahu and Ketu appears at many places, and this is not part of one of those four rules, but in many articles and examples you will see this, that reject this planet and take Rahu, because the Rahu or Ketu might be representing that planet because of some aspect or conjunction or the Rashi. Now this creates another set of confusion. If you were to replace Jupiter with Rahu, then now you don't know whether Rahu is going to represent all these things, where Rahu is equal to Jupiter and then it represents everything, 2, 5, 8, 6, 9, 4, 3, 10, or Rahu is just equal to Jupiter by representing 2, 5, 8. So now there is another set of confusion that arises because of this kind of interpretation about the signification of Rahu and Ketu. Now there is another set of layout where the conjunction, aspect, sign is all rolled together, and this Rahu and Ketu are shown as significator of houses that fall into this very wide net. Take this example. Now here Rahu represents none by conjunction, and when we are looking at conjunction, aspect and sign, we are only looking at the Lagna chart. So Rahu in the Lagna chart has no conjunction, and Rahu by aspect represents Jupiter. So we see that Jupiter is aspecting Rahu, and Rahu by sign represents Saturn, because Rahu is occupying Aquarius sign, so it represents Saturn. So essentially now Rahu is representing Jupiter and Rahu is representing Saturn. And the way to put this in the table is to indicate all the signification through Jupiter and Saturn that were bestowed on Rahu. So this is mentioned like this, where the Rahu is in the 7th house in the Kaspa chart, and then the other significations are coming through the Jupiter and Saturn, through the Jupiter aspect and Saturn, because Rahu is occupying the Aquarius sign. Now this approach seems to suggest a clarity, but unless you realize that this rolling of all possible signification coming through conjunction, aspect and sign, it causes another very big challenge. Now take a look at this chart. If all possible signification by conjunction, aspect and Rashi are all rolled up, then you end up with a chart something like this. And now here what Rahu is representing is, Rahu by conjunction represents none, Rahu by aspect. Now aspect is another big issue because there is always a 7th aspect. So Rahu by aspect represents Sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and then Rahu by aspect represents Moon. So all these things when rolled into all possible signification, and then you end up with something like this, where Rahu is representing so many houses. So this is a proliferation of signification, and this looks a little scary. You see, there is already a stereotype of fear about the Rahu and Ketu, and if someone with this kind of a chart, this is a chart of someone who was born on February 5th, 1962. And if a person with this kind of comes to you, and then suppose that person is going through the Rahu and Ketu Bhukti, and you were going to tell that person that this kind of signification are going to take place during the Rahu Dasha and Ketu Bhukti, because this is what Rahu and Ketu are indicating. This is enough to send a chill down the spine of many users. And as a KP astrologer, you are also not sure what you might want to offer during the Rahu Dasha and Ketu Bhukti. So this abundance of signification is itself a huge challenge. So we saw with some examples that how these rules for Rahu and Ketu give rise to all kind of confusion, and on top of it there is no clarity. And additionally, if you look at the rules that were laid down by KP, there is already a if condition. If you make a note of this if condition, that if for example the rule number 2, if it says if no planet is in conjunction with Rahu and Ketu, they bestow the result of the planet aspecting them. I have not seen anyone following that, and I don't think anybody takes this rule very seriously. But that condition is there. And another issue is that when you talk about the aspect that the Rahu or Ketu being aspected by the planets start giving the result of that particular planet. Now what happens is if Ketu is conjoined with 3 or 4 planets, right, and then or Rahu is conjoined with 3 or 4 planets, then immediately the Ketu will start giving all those signification, and that is true for Rahu also. Another thing is that the 3 or 4 planet conjunction with Rahu, this is not very unusual. It happens because Rahu takes 1.5 years to be in the one sign, and during that sign Sun, Moon and Mercury at one time they are going to be in that sign, and that will generate all these the conjunction, and that conjunction will result in the proliferation or the abundance of signification that we just saw. So now the thing is, what is the way out? What do we do? So one of the best approaches that I noticed was in the book The Sublord Speaks. This series is also the foundation on which the popularly the 4-step theory is based. The articles that are in this series, The Sublord Speaks. And in this book there is one good thing, that there is a consistent tone, consistent note that Rahu and Ketu represents only the sign that they are occupying. So if you go through these books, then there is a consistent tone that the only this particular rule is applicable, that Rahu and Ketu, they represent the sign of the planet whose Rashi they are occupying. All of the rules are ignored. There is no ambiguity, and this is the only rule that is followed in this book. And so I started taking this very seriously, and I'm not talking about the 4th step over here. I'm just talking about the clarity and the unambiguity in declaring that Rahu and Ketu represents the results of the sign they are occupying. Now let's make a use of this horoscope. Now in this chart, if you apply the usual rules, then Rahu by conjunction represents Sun, Mercury. Rahu by aspect represents Moon, Jupiter. Rahu by sign represents Venus. So this is one way of saying what Rahu represents. And if you look at this layout, where all these signification has been bundled together, then this is how you write. Rahu representing so many houses. So, but like we discussed that we are just going to focus on the sign of the Rahu is occupying. So Rahu is occupying the Taurus sign. So we are just going to look at the signification of Rahu through Taurus. That is, Rahu equals to Venus. So it's going to just represent whatever Venus has to promise. So now if we modify the signification of Rahu according to Rahu signifying Venus only. So now our modified signification is going to look like this. Right. So now if you compare this with Rahu signifying all these houses, and this is the horoscope of President Trump, and at one time it was running the Rahu Dasha, but with this kind of a signification, it's very difficult to figure it out what kind of things to predict and not to predict. But the moment you say that Rahu is in Taurus is equal to Venus, then Rahu represents the house 10 and 11. So that makes sense, and that Rahu is representing the house 10 and 11. And similarly, now I think is undergoing the Jupiter period. So Jupiter is representing the Mars, and it is in the sub of Rahu. But since now Rahu is only representing 10 and 11, so what we are going to do is we are going to remove all other signification, right? So now he is going through the Jupiter period, and where Rahu as a sublord is only indicating 10 and 11. There is no proliferation, there is no abundance of signification. So now you can focus and see that if you follow this line, then it's more easy to interpret the result of Rahu and Ketu. So I would strongly encourage you to try the Rahu-Ketu representing the sign only. Start with your chart and with your family member chart. Rahu and Ketu has been causing a lot of confusion. But my observation is that Rahu-Ketu representing the sign is a simple and elegant way to interpret the notes. And another thing I wanted to point out was that if you remember those 4 rules of about the notes that we mentioned at the very beginning, the first rule is that the notes represent the planet by conjunction. So that's the rule 1. And in President Trump chart, the Rahu and the Sun, all these 2 planets are in a very close conjunction. And Sun is the Lagna Lord and Rahu is in the 10th, and these are in a very close conjunction. So, and whenever I look at this chart, then I think that I should be also focusing on the conjunction only for the nodes, not for any other planet, because the conjunction appears at the rule 1 by Shri Krishnamurti. So that's why I thought that I will focus on this aspect also, that if a node by conjunction, and when I say by conjunction, it doesn't mean that it's in one sign. By conjunction means it is in one sign and it is in a span of 3 degrees. So that's what is meant by conjunction. And see, to be the President of the United States is not a mean achievement, and Rahu equals to Sun by conjunction in 10th, it gives pretty much good weight. So, but I'm going to do some more experiment, and I'm going to gather some more charts. I don't have many charts with where nodes are in close conjunction with any other planet, but I'm going to save that discussion for some future video. Thanks for watching.